Hello there, faithful viewer or listener, and welcome to a special, very unique episode of Hit or Miss Star Trek, your friendly Star Trek podcast. Not so friendly necessarily today, but we shall see. The reason for this, if you haven't already guessed by the thumbnail that you presumably clicked on, is that, as you probably know, Star Trek Strange New Worlds recently reached the end of its third season. The third season finale aired at the time of recording a couple of days ago. I was not impressed with it, and I posted my feelings in a very short summary on social media, as I want to do on occasion. I'll repeat it here, just so you know, and then give the reasons for getting a little bit into it. So first of all, what I posted, completely spoiler-free, on social media in regards to the specific episode, New Life and New Civilizations, Season 3, Episode 10, the finale, was... that was absolutely atrocious. Some of the worst writing I've ever seen in anything, let alone Star Trek. So many totally awful decisions, and I honestly cannot find a single redeeming factor. 0 out of 10. Harsh words and strong ones, and ones that I stand by, and I do believe. And I posted to social media, and as you would expect, a lot of people saying, I would like to hear how you would justify that score. What are your reasons? And I do have them, and I did post them on a little personal Discord that I have with a few friends in a very long rant, and I think they're valid. And a friend of mine did express that they thought it was valid as well. Also, didn't particularly love the episode or this particular season of Strange New Worlds, which again I'll get into. But so I kind of wanted to do this because a few people then sort of had said, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts and to hear you break down what you think are valid points about this particular episode. And then it occurred to me, I'm also seeing a lot of people complain about this season of Strange New Worlds as a whole, which I have kind of thought was weaker as it's went by week on week. And so I kind of wanted to also make this video to, once I'm finished ranting about this season finale, to, analyze that question that many people are asking or answering for themselves, which is, has Star Trek Strange New Worlds already jumped the shark? If you're not familiar with that phrase, look it up. It's basically comes from an old episode of Happy Days where it's considered that the show got rubbish after an episode in which Fonzie literally jumped over a shark. So, yeah, just means, has the show suddenly gotten to the point where it's going to be rubbish from now on? It's peaked, basically. So, so first of all, as I said, we're going to deal with New Life and New Civilizations. I didn't want to post this out on social media because it's heavily spoilery with that, of that episode, I should say. And I didn't think that was fair until everyone has a chance to see it. And because not everybody loves spoilers and not everyone watches things at the same pace. But I did want to get these thoughts across, as I said, because some people were asking, and because I want to vent them, to be perfectly honest. I did it on our Discord, but I figure if it's here for posterity, I can always point people to this video if they wonder what my thoughts are about this, and then more broadly about Strange New World Season 3 and beyond. So first of all, like I said, 0 out of 10 is a strong score, and one that I almost never give, but I really disliked this episode of Strange New Worlds. And again, if you liked it, I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm not saying, I'm begrudging you that. There are things that other people don't like that I love, and I can not care about the issues. You may well listen to me rant about my problems with the episode, completely disagree with them, or agree but say you don't care and it doesn't hurt how much you enjoyed the episode, and that's fair enough. This is literally just my personal opinion, and potentially, if anybody shares it, some of the other reasons why some people might be saying that they didn't think it was very good. I have seen a couple of people saying they liked the episode, but the majority of people that I've seen on my social media feeds tend to agree with me that it wasn't very good. So, first of all, the episode, it would already be bad enough for me in its overall plot, because I also kind of hated the episode through the lens of time earlier this season. So I was never going to be thrilled at revisiting that storyline, the Vesda and all that. I didn't like it. I know that Star Trek has a history of pretty BS supernatural stuff, Gary Mitchell and the, psychic powers and telekinesis, the prophets and the Parates especially, which I've already mentioned on a very recent podcast. I never liked all that stuff. I don't like when Star Trek reaches there, because for me, Star Trek is about science. It's science fiction, not science fantasy or pure fantasy. Your mileage again may vary. You might not mind that. You might like that. You might prefer that. I don't like when Star Trek goes fantastical. For me, it's just not really that kind of show. The idea of an incorporeal evil that predates the concept, a magical guardian, and all of this being conveniently possible because time doesn't matter and effect can precede cause, were all things that just, to me, did not sit right at all. For various reasons. But first of all, number one, congratulations on living a completely predetermined life. There are so many things that had to happen because of fate or because of predetermination to so many characters for this episode to happen that the writers and the writing have just determined as such. Going right the way back decades. I mean, Mbenga has to have killed somebody when he was, I think he said 12 years old. That has to have happened. He didn't have a choice in that because it was already predestined. He had to have met Ensign Gamble, who had to have gone into nursing and had to have ended up on the Enterprise. Captain Pike has to have met Batel and got into a relationship with her. The Enterprise has to have encountered the Gorn incident at the end of season 2. Batel has to have been infected by those Gorn. Pike has to have done exactly all the things that he did to create this hybridized creature of her. The Enterprise has to have gone to planet, I think was Vadia 9, for the events of Through the Lens of Time. Gamble has to have been on that away team. He has to have picked up the orb that shot the life form into him. There's so many things that, butterfly effect alone, it renders everything completely null and void, because it's basically saying everything that happened has to happen because effect preceded cause, and this all had to occur on a grander narrative, so therefore all of these people had no say. I'm not cool with that. I prefer the idea of free will. And I know, people would argue with some aspect of, you've got to stick to canon with Strange New Worlds, and I'm one of them. I don't believe that the show really could or should say, well, we think we need the character of Pike, for example, to have free will, so we shouldn't now have the accident because he knows about it. A different argument from a different series, basically, and certainly a different season of this show. But I do think that is something that has to be predetermined on a larger scale outside of the universe, because we know what happens. It happens, and you have to kind of keep that intact. But what you don't then do is try and write your way and worm your way around it, which, again, I'll get to in one of my other complaints. I'm trying to keep it bit by bit. But yeah, there's a big difference, I think, between maintaining predetermined canon and having a plot that requires multiple people to have had no say in events that they lived through. So yeah, I didn't like that in the first place. So it's awful writing. And for me, what makes this worse is that the plot line of this, the story of this episode, actively makes Star Trek worse. It actively hurts Trek that we already know. And it's mostly to shoddily write their way out of issues that they caused. The writers of this show and Discovery are the ones that decided that Pike would see his fate and would know about that accident, and that we would definitely have to be marching towards that. We're in the Prime Universe, we're in canon. That has to happen. So Pike has to meet his destiny, and he has to end up with Vina. But we have a show to make, and we've kind of established this relationship with Captain Batel for Pike in our show now that we have these intervening years. And frankly, we want to have our cake and eat it too. So now, because we've created a whole other love of Pike's life, we get to magically have them spend a lifetime together, so that Batel can be as important as Vina to Pike, and their relationship can be meaningful, because otherwise it's kind of silly. And, they wrote this relationship and didn't think, to my mind, of a way to end it. I don't know if this plot was predetermined. If it was, okay, fair enough. It's still bad. But to me, it just feels like they wanted an established relationship, because apparently everybody on this ship has to have one, and knew it had to end because they knew that's not the canon of it. So yeah, I just hated it. And not only that, let's all, when we're watching the menagerie now, we can see that the ending, which I've always loved in the past, the unexpected relief of that happy ending that Pike despite his body being completely shattered and everything, can now live a second chance, a happy life with Vina, the love of his life. Well, you know what? Never mind, because it turns out that was pretty much his second choice. And he's already had that exact experience with Patel. He's lived out a lifetime with her and would probably have been happier, to be honest. So, yeah, now we've actually made the menagerie actively worse. Kudos. That's sarcasm. Yeah, so yeah, screw Vina, I guess. Not important because she's not Patel. The Kirk-Spock mind meld is the next thing I want to deal with. Oh my word. Now, aside from the annoying, nerdy canon fact that's already been an issue in this series, that in Star Trek the Original Series, in one of the episodes, Spock explicitly says he has never mind melded with a human before, let alone with Kirk himself. Now, that's one line in a show 60 years ago. I could forgive that if there was a well-written excuse for it. I did forgive it in season 1 when he mind-melded with La'an, because it was like, why be beholden to one line? It's not the end of the world. But this particular thing that I can't forgive is, this just seems like a shortcut, which is a problem I have with so much of the writing of Strange New Worlds. It seems like it's designed to give you an unnecessary conceit as to why Kirk and Spock are so connected and that relationship is so special. And let's be honest here, they're probably in love in one way or another. Now, you can believe that in whatever way you like. I know a lot of people are Kirk-Spock shippers. I'm not a shipper person. It's not my thing. Whether I believe Kirk and Spock romantically love each other, I believe if that's what you want to believe, that's absolutely a valid interpretation. Fantastic. I also don't think it's the only interpretation. I think love has many forms. There are different kinds of love. There's familial love. And yes, there is a friendship that is so powerful and deep that you can love that person platonically, as the phrase is used. So I think that is entirely possible, that Kirk and Spock could have that level of closeness and that love that isn't about romance or sex or any of those things, if that is what you believe. But either way, we know that they have an established close relationship because we've watched it over 60 years. We've seen it. We've seen the way it was portrayed by these various actors. And rather than actually doing the work of showing that developing relationship and letting it stand on its own, they wanted a shortcut. They wanted a plot BS reason to give you as to why they're close. So now it's not because they saw something in each other or they met and they developed a relationship of any kind. It's, they mind melded. So they knew everything about each other instantly and just had that level of closeness. Why? Why have you now unnecessarily ruined arguably Trek's most foundational relationship? It's now, it's not something that happens naturally. It's now something that was forced by this plot device. And no, it's not necessary. And what makes it worse for me is that they seem to have started to establish that level of closeness and that relationship earlier in the season. An episode I liked, The Sailor Who Ate Its Tail, was the title of the episode. That was going somewhere. That was establishing the relationship between Kirk and Spock because, they bonded, as people can do. That doesn't have to be a BS sci-fi explanation reason for bonding. People can just bond. Anyway, and again, aside from that, I kind of have to question why exactly Spock didn't mind meld for the purposes of the mission in this episode with the actual Vulcan captain of the USS Farragut, who we've met, and you can't tell me it wouldn't be more logically efficient to have two Vulcans engage in this process rather than a Vulcan and Kirk for reasons, which, by the way, are never given. But, of course, that would not be the characters we know, and we have to play into that nostalgia, and it would mean that the actress who plays the captain of the Farragut, poor woman, would actually have to get some lines rather than just standing behind Paul Wesley in the episode doing absolutely nothing. Not a fan. The Patel thing. Now, I waited a full season to find out what the deal is with that. It was obvious they were going somewhere. They didn't kill her off when the Gorn infected her, which is already an issue because I hate the fact that they did that with Hemmer, and now they're basically saying that didn't need to happen. I guess he was just less important to the writers. But anyway, we knew something was happening with that because you couldn't just undo that, and they didn't, and they were developing a storyline. And again, I've waited the full season to find out what the deal is. And instead we get this magical, complete nonsense that just doesn't make any sense at all. It just doesn't feel like it belongs in a Trek episode. If this was the planned reason behind the Gorn infection, it's abysmal. It feels like they went from an A to Z, instead of A to B, and now I'm asking, like, how and why? What is this? What does this have to do with anything? How does infecting her with the Gorn then lead to her becoming this magical thing? And the explanation we're given in the episode is, because it makes her a hybrid of every life form who's all fought evil, and then names that she's a hybrid of 3: human, Illyrian, and Gorn. Okay, fair enough. But why Batel? There are multiple hybrid creatures and life forms and races in this universe. Heck, she's 3 life forms. Okay, somebody who's 2 is right next to her, Spock. He's 2 out of 3. He's 2/3 of the way there. So why Batel? Is she the first person to ever be a mixture of 3 species? Again, no, it's nonsense. It's, it was my fate because it's predestined, because the writing says it is, because the script says it is, and gets away with it by saying destiny. Just really weak writing. If you're going to try and make somebody that important, I need good reason for it. And that good reason can't be because we said so, which is effectively what this boils down to. No, it's abysmal. I don't get it. It's to me, that's awful writing. And again, it's because we established her as the love of Pike's life, and we know we have to get rid of her to maintain canon. So, well, now we've built up this relationship. We can't just kill her off. We need to have some kind of grand magical destiny, I suppose. So that's what we got. And I'm sorry, but wouldn't it have been more powerful if she had just died and Pike had to deal with that grief and wrestle with the knowledge that life can sometimes be random and cruel, whilst also the fact that, to him, a fate worse than death, which is its own issue, is coming up, but he has to kind of contend that, like, sometimes horrible things just happen. And that, I'm sorry, that's taken me a few seconds, and that's already a better script than what we got here, with more rich character stuff than what we were given, which is just, okay, so now Batel's gone, but not really gone, because she's guarding these things and she lives in the stars and they had their life together. It's nonsense. And I said this to a friend, it's like a bad episode of Doctor Who, which is referenced here, so that would, I suppose, make sense. But it's not Star Trek. It's magical fantasy nonsense. I hate it. Anyway. I have more to say, believe me. So, yeah, I have other niggles, but I guess they're kind of comparatively less egregious, and they're not confined to this episode. So I'll expand my scope and get into those. First of all, I've grown to hate La'an, not because of canon reasons or anything, but just because they just don't seem to know how to write her. And I don't like that this show needs Spock to have a girlfriend. First of all, it's one big issue I've got with it, and I know, again, I'm not the only one. But with Spock and Chapel, you already have that established thing. So, okay, you're changing things a little bit for my mind, because there's no implication they've been a couple already in the original series. But you're working with established framework. I guess I can forgive it if you do something there. But then to have Spock and La'an get together, I hated that choice. And again, everything that La'an does just seems like the writing wants to portray her as heroic and great, but everything she does is rubbing me up the wrong way in various ways. Case in point, I mentioned when I reviewed the episode before the season finale, Terrarium, which I really loved, by the way. I mentioned in my review of that I really hoped that there were going to be some kind of consequences for the fact that La'an just murdered an innocent sentient life form. Okay, I know they were gone and we have our own issues, and she definitely has her own past traumas about that. But she's a Starfleet security officer. If those traumas prevent her doing her job, that's an issue. And I'm not saying she had to have been, flogged or fired or put in the brig or anything, but to completely ignore it, which is what I knew was going to happen, to just completely not acknowledge the fact that it's an issue, really sits wrong with me. It's completely ignored, and it's probably going to be portrayed it was the right thing to do for her and whatever else. And so I hated that there were no consequences this episode for that. The entire incident was completely forgotten. Excuse me. And why? I mean, this is Star Trek. That's one of the fundamental things we should be dealing with. You know, this is a new life form. And yes, you may well have a justification to feel the way that you do. I understand that. But at the same time, we have to deal with the fact that she murdered a sentient life form who was doing nothing wrong. That's a plot we could address instead of this magical life form nonsense. But again, no, we're not going to do that. And yeah, the Chapel and Corby thing, it feels again like they're repeating the mistake I mentioned with Pike of trying to dance around maintaining canon, but not wanting to lose a cast member. In this case, Jess Bush as Nurse Chapel. And so we have this kind of half-assed attempt for them to be having a relationship, and it's long distance, and they have met each other, and they probably will get engaged because we know that's in the canon, and he will go missing. Also, and yes, I know this is ridiculous, but it's a real bugbear niggle, and I think it's quite evocative and shows something. At the end of the episode, Uhura saying, okay, let's take off and examine these planets. Hailing frequencies open. To who? It's like the writers of this show hear Trek catchphrases, don't bother learning their deeper meaning, and decide, let's shove that in an episode. It's like, it doesn't make any sense. And yeah, again, that just shows everything. And this season does, to me, feel like a jump the shark moment of sorts that I'll hopefully try and justify if this video, doesn't go too long. And I don't think that what we've seen so far, the only thing we've seen so far of what's coming up, a puppet episode, is going to be the much needed course correction. I have no excitement for that. Anything's possible. I loved the musical episode, even though many were skeptical about it. It could be great, but my initial reaction to that wasn't, yay, what whimsy. It was to groan. Because, again, it's just gimmicks instead of depth and instead of good writing, to my mind anyway. I mean, it could be, that's probably unfair to judge it, but it could be that's certainly what it looks like. Yeah. And again, a friend of mine again pointed out, because of the way they're filming everything already in blocks, they're basically already done filming season 4, about to start season 5. There's no way that they can take any of this criticism on board and change their plans or their writing. So if it's bad now, it's not going to get any better. I just think it's gone off the boil in this episode. Well, it was a 0 out of 10. There wasn't anything. And again, a good friend of mine had said, oh, well, I wouldn't say 0 out of 10. I'd say 2 out of 10 because the production values are great and because the actors are giving it their all. And what I would say to that, to justify my thoughts and feelings, is I don't give you credit for production values that exist in every episode, frankly. That's not specific to this episode. And likewise, the actors and the acting. I expect the actors to be doing a good job. So to say, oh, well, they acted this well is the bare minimum of what you expect. And I'll be honest, I don't think any actor could have made me feel warmer about this particular script of this episode that I've been discussing. So, yeah, that was my issues with specifically New Life and New Civilizations 3.10. And so I thought, so season 3's taken a lot of flack. And I've rated all 3 seasons of Strange New Worlds. I did a big rewatch before season 3, and I've given it ratings out of 10. And I thought, why not dive into that a little bit and see if people agree with my thoughts on season 3 particularly, and do a kind of impromptu season 3 review. So my scores for season 3, I won't dive deep into it, but I'll give you those scores and a little bit of an explanation. Now, first of all, Hegemony Part 2. I gave it 6 out of 10. It wasn't terrible, but as a resolution of the Gorn arc, and, we'd waited years for it to resolve that. Well, not that arc, but that first part, which I thought was really good. It just felt like the setup was a massive cop-out and just, again, arbitrary. Now, not only do they copy The Best of Both Worlds Part 2 for the resolution, sending them all to sleep, but there are so many things teased in Part 1 that don't go anywhere. It's teased in Part 1 that the Gorn are acting differently, and there must be a reason for it, which is ignored. And again, I was hoping that we would get something closer to the canon Gorn that we know in Star Trek, which again happens later in the season. I'll get to that. But instead of that, we double down on this idea of them being monstrous and horrible and irredeemable, and, the awful grisly inside of their ship and everything that happened there, and the trauma that Ortegas goes through and everything. It was just, I don't like what Strange New Worlds have done to the Gorn to start with. And like I said, I was hoping for more of a slightly course correction, I guess, again. for that, and that episode didn't give me it. But within itself, not a terrible episode. Some of the actions were good, the special effects were good. There were some decent scenes. I thought the situation with Patel was well acted, and it was nice and subversive, not to just have it be, well, I'm afraid we have to kill you off. And so there was enough there to keep me interested, and I didn't hate the episode. But yeah, 6 out of 10. Wedding Bell Blues, of course, came next. Now, I've given this episode a 9 out of 10, but with the caveat that I'm well aware that that's just because I am a fan, and it is 100% catering to fans. And I would not blame you if you just say to me it's fan service, and that's why you don't like it. For me, that's why I do like it. Strange New Worlds has a history of wanting to do funny, silly, kooky, wacky episodes, and I never particularly like them. Earlier we've had Spock being made fully human or swapping bodies with T'Pring. I don't know. Another one will come up again later this season, which I'll get to. And this was kind of a chance for them to do that kind of episode, but in a way that I actually like, because it has Star Trek precedent. And we got to see Trelane again for the first time since the original series. That's an established character and one that we know. So you're building on something, and you're using that character, as ridiculous as they are, to actually explore emotional depth. In this case, Spock and his breaking up with Chapel and her getting with Corby, and giving us an episode to actually deal with that, instead of just having it be, it's canon, so it has to happen, so it's done, and now we're moving on. No, it was nice to explore that, but it was also nice that there was some good humor in the episode as well. And again, yes, it's fan service, but spoiler alert, the reveal of Q at the end, and finally tying that bit of fan canon that many of us have had in our heads for years, was just, for me, such a nice, sweet moment and a nice nod to fans that I was so warm to the overall episode. I may not like it as much when I rewatch it, but at the time I just thought it did a lot of things right. So I gave it 9 out of 10. Shuttle to Ken Forey was an episode that surprised me, because I didn't necessarily think from all of the previews and publicity images and such that it was an episode I would particularly like. And again, once I heard that the concept was, facing off against zombies, I was a little nervous of that, because it's not a particularly science-y or Star Trek concept, even though it's been used before and it can work. And again, it does work in this episode, because it's given a very, for me, logical enough science explanation. I won't get into it because it's in the episode itself, but the idea of this, this plant and the way what it does is now, mapped onto a survey team or a science team that don't take the right precautions, and they become something that we would look on as zombies, even though it's not technically the case. These aren't reanimated corpses, but they act that way. So effectively, we can use that shorthand. Cool. But yeah, I didn't mind all of that. I thought, again, I liked that we were dealing with the Battelle thing, and it was giving some depth, and I liked the way that Anson Mount was acting that kind of desperation. And then I loved that it was an unexpected sequel to Under the Cloak of War from season 2, which was an episode I didn't particularly love. But again, what they do with it here, I really liked, because it's showing consequences for things. We're not ignoring the death of the ambassador previously, or Mbenga's kind of moral gray area at the very least that goes with that. And again, I loved exploring that. I thought Babs, who plays Mbenga, did a fantastic job portraying that. And again, those last scenes between him and Anton, I thought were great. The actress, I'm blanking on her name, who plays the Klingon, I thought was, again, fantastic. And it was a thrilling episode. And as an homage to zombie stuff, it also kind of worked as well. So I gave it 8 out of 10. And the next episode up was a Space Adventure Hour. I liked a lot of this, and I think most of my criticism of it comes down to the ending. So I gave it a 7 out of 10 in the end. Now, I didn't mind the holodeck thing. Again, they do enough to fit it into canon that it makes sense. It's still nice as a fan, thrilled to see the next gen, yellow bars holodeck with the yellow grid pattern on it. It was a well-worn idea, but a nice one to have the kind of characters of the show recast as holodeck characters and have the mystery within that. I liked the kind of Star Trek homage itself that was part of that, the story within a story kind of thing, and thought that worked pretty well. But again, what knocks it down for me is that the overall plot idea is so blatantly again, ripped off from other Star Trek. It's elementary, dear Data. Holodeck, give me a challenge that only I could possibly be able to solve, but really that will challenge me. And it's just, we've done that. And you didn't really make an effort to disguise it all that well or give me a reason why that was better. And again, you're using a character I don't love anyway. But then to end the episode with the official Spock and La'an getting together, no, I hate that. Like I said, Spock is not a character that I think should be having a girlfriend every week, And again, it's shipper culture, which I don't particularly love. And it's to appeal to, I want this character to be with this character type viewers. And that's not for me what Star Trek has ever been. You can experience that and feel that way within the episodes, but it's not what this feels like, which is pandering to that. And yeah, I don't love that. I don't like that they ended up together. That hurt the episode. Through the lens of time, I've already touched on. I gave it a 3 out of 10. I didn't think it was, irredeemably atrocious, but I don't like the idea of these creatures, these incorporeal. I've already forgotten their name, but yeah, these Vadia 9 Vesda. There we go. I didn't like the idea of them. I think it's silly. It doesn't really belong in Star Trek, and the episode itself bored me because the concept doesn't grab me, and I didn't care, to be perfectly honest, because it just seemed so nonsensical. I was removed. The reason I didn't give it the worst possible score that I gave to the season finale is there were things in it that I still did like. I thought some of the acting was selling the idea a little bit better than it eventually ends up doing. And in particular, things like the shock of what happened to Ensign Gamble in the moment and the way that was acted and the emotional effect that has on Mbenga, I thought, they're well portrayed, even if it's not a plot line that I'm kind of going with here. So I could appreciate that. And yeah, there were things, the interesting nature of the idea behind the traps in the episode and stuff was enough that I was like, okay, I appreciate it. There's an original idea here. Cool. But overall, still 3 out of 10. I've touched on this next one again, the Sailor Who Ate Its Tail. For me, this was a 9 out of 10. I loved this episode so much about it. I loved that we actually got to see the developing relationship between Kirk and Spock, and it was happening naturally, and it was well written. And nice touching scenes and great moments. I love the central plot idea of this kind of mythical nightmare ship, basically, and the ultimate reveal of it was such a nice, original idea and so cool. It's not necessarily something I would write myself or would agree with, but it's hard to deny the impact of it and just be so intrigued by it. As a reveal, again, that is just so much better than this thing is evil because we say it is, or this thing is just something that we've written this way for reasons that we won't explain. It was so good to have a bit more to that. And again, the episode itself was great. Seeing, I'm always a sucker for good space battles, and seeing the Farragut get torn apart was kind of fun. Not that I've got anything against the ship, it's just I like, cool space battles sometimes. I'm a basic beat. So yeah, and yeah, I just liked so much of that episode. I thought it really worked, and so 9 out of 10. What is Starfleet? I know a lot of people have had their issues with, and I am no exception. So yeah, the episode could have been really interesting. A lot of people do like to ask the questions about Starfleet and how they maintain this kind of utopian idealism. I don't personally feel like we need to do that. I don't want everything to be deconstructionist. I think I said to somebody on Blue Sky, not every superhero story has to be Watchmen. Sometimes we can just have this thing that we appreciate. And for me, Star Trek has always been that, and Starfleet has been that. It's something to, I know that it's fantastically unreal and whatever, that's the nature of utopia, but it's a kind of an escape, and it gives me something to hope for, something to dream about, and something to look to when times are dark, which they currently are. And I don't want to spend my time dismantling that. But again, other people would counter, this is a good time to examine how we can achieve those goals and when they are tested and what needs to be done to make sure that they're not corrupted and so on. And that's also perfectly valid. Unfortunately, this episode, despite being a documentary that literally asks the question, what is Starfleet, didn't really, to me, address any of those questions. It was boring in its own way. It was surface level. It seemed like, and again, a lot of people have said this, the ending around halfway, it just switched to Starfleet are great because they are. The moral dilemma wasn't handled particularly well. Any potential real world allegories were either ignored or probably not thought of. And overall, the episode, I just didn't care about it yet again. It ended and I was like, well, that was an episode that happened. But again, I can't even say it was actively bad because, again, there's some original concepts here. The actual life form itself and the way it's being used by the two races was interesting. I just wish they'd done something more with it. The idea of a documentary and the way that's framed, I thought was really clever. And again, could have been brilliant if they'd done a bit more with it. But, you know, on a surface level, visually what they did with it and some of the tropes were cool. So this for me was the definition of down the middle. I gave it a 5 out of 10 because it's an episode that's just kind of, it's there. It's not egregiously bad. It's also not especially good because to me, it just doesn't do anything. It just plays out and happens. So down the middle. 4.5 Vulcans. Now, this is an episode I knew I was going to have to address. I didn't think I was going to like the episode when they released the preview for somewhat nerdy reasons that, you know, a species like the Vulcans, you don't transform into them and then suddenly develop their logic thing. I'm not going to get into the whole thing, but, you know, it's been established many times. Vulcans have emotions. They feel them stronger than humans, and the way they repress them is years of mental training. It's not part of their genes. It's not a physical thing. You know, the repression isn't built into them. So I didn't think the episode was already going to be great because it seemed like, again, we're fundamentally misunderstanding Star Trek for the purposes of doing catchphrases and things that we reckon, oh, they're acting like Spock. Ha. You know, and again, it was one of those wacky episodes, which I never particularly love anyway, when Strange New Worlds feels the need to do them. But I'm also aware of a much bigger controversy around this that I don't feel I'm personally equipped to delve completely into. Because it feels to me like what I'm seeing, and I can actually see it as people are describing it to me, is that this episode is incredibly offensive to mixed race people in the way that it treats Spock as lesser than and the way that it addresses him. There's also incredible controversy around the way that Uhura acts in her relationship when she is turned Vulcan and the kind of what's portrayed as grooming. As well as people having issue with the portrayal of the Vulcans, which again, I agree with. I don't like the way they're often portrayed as a-holes either. And yeah, all of the issues with the episode may well be, you know, something that you have a problem with. And I'm not going to say that I don't have a problem with them because as I heard them, I saw them. But I can't honestly sit here and say that they were things that occurred to me as I watched in the moment. Now, that's my own privilege. I fully acknowledge that fact because it wasn't things that applied. I also don't think that the writers set out to specifically offend anybody with the episode. I think they were ignorant. Now, that's not an excuse. You know, ignorance is still a problem. But I also don't think that they probably gave it much thought beyond the surface level of, wouldn't it be funny if everybody was like Spock, but, you know, worse? And that's the kind of gubbins that we got fed. I gave this episode, and this is going to be controversial for some, I think, 4 out of 10, because, and again, I know many people that would argue this is the one that deserved the 0 out of 10, but I think I was relieved that ultimately it wasn't as atrocious as I was expecting it to be. And what I mean by that is that they did at least try on a nerd level to explain that, yes, they are aware this volcanism stuff takes mental training, but the serum somehow forewent that or was able to give you the equivalent of that, which, all right, I mean, at least you've addressed it. It's nonsense, but whatever. And also, as I said many times before the episode came out, the idea that somebody had become genetically Vulcan but didn't have that mental training would turn them into a Romulan. And I like that the episode actually did address that. It really surprised me. La'an, in particular, or specifically, became a Romulan, because that would make sense, even if the writers don't realize that she shouldn't actually know that there's a connection between Romulans and Vulcans. She does kind of express that in a scene with Pike in the episode. And yeah, I mean, it's bad enough when you're not watching the franchises as a whole, but you're not watching your own show, because she never saw what a Romulan looks like. She only saw a Romulan that was disguised as a human. She has no reason to have any inkling that they've got anything to do with Vulcans. But again, that's a nitpick. It's just, again, indicative of not paying attention and not particularly great writing. And again, it feeds into good writing, though, that, you know, the Romulan thing was addressed. There were also scenes in the episode not to do with the main plot that I didn't hate. I quite enjoyed some of the kind of Patton Oswalt characters' jokes. Not all of them. Some of them are atrocious. Some of them really worked. And the post-credit thing, I think, with Ethan Peck was charming in its own way. And yeah, I think some of the other actors and parts of the episode weren't the most atrocious thing in the world. And I can't even remember what I particularly liked that when I gave it that score, but I think part of it, like I said, was just relief that it wasn't as bad as I feared it could be. But again, I fully have seen people say this is as insensitive as episodes like Code of Honor or Profit and Lace. And I'm not saying it's not. I'm saying I didn't see that until it was pointed out to me, which is on me. And I don't think that it's, for me, I don't think it's as egregious as kind of some of those examples. For example, Code of Honor, I don't believe you could see that episode and not realize how incredibly racist it is and how it is written that way. Whereas here, I think it is just a simple question of they wrote something they thought was funny or they thought was wacky and didn't realize that it's actually also on another level very offensive. So yeah, but in either case, I think the episode still falls more negative than positive. It's still a miss. I still only gave it a 4 out of 10, but again, I think a lot of that is just relief that it didn't fully suck the way that I build it up to. Terrarium is the best episode of the season for me. I gave it 10 out of 10. Again, I know a lot of you will say that's because it is pandering to fans and it's fan service, and to that I say it is, but it also uses that to do a really good story and to finally correct a Strange New World's unforced mistake instead of doubling down on it and making it worse. So I love that we did. Yes, again, it's a riff on a popular and a well-known idea. It's Enemy Mine. It's the episode Dawn from Enterprise. There's hints of Darmok in there. This is a story that's been done. I mean, it's been done in other shows. I love the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. episode where this happens to Gemma Simmons. She ends up stranded on a planet with one other person. If you're a fan of that show, you'll know what I'm talking about. That's an episode that I love, one of my favorites of that show. But again, the strength in it is the way that it's written and the way that kind of relationship between those two characters develops. And I think it was written very well. I also have been desperately waiting for an episode to foreground Ortegas, because I think that character and Melissa Navia as an actress are criminally underused in the show. Now, Ortegas is one of the few characters that doesn't have a canon destiny and that we don't have to tiptoe our writing around. She's also a character that we don't have anything to base our kind of affection for her on. And yet, despite all of that, she's a character that is, to my mind and my kind of group of friends, probably the best character on the show. And that's purely because of the way she's written and the way that that Melissa portrays her, that she's become beloved. And you're not relying on nostalgia for her to be beloved, and you're not relying on us knowing where she ends up. We're actually interested to know. And I think this episode just goes to show, when you give Melissa the real meaty stuff to delve into, she's also an exceptional actress. This episode could have failed spectacularly if she wasn't up to it. And make no mistake, it wasn't easy. She carries the episode. She's asked to do it, and she does it. And if any one part of it had felt unbelievable, had felt overacted, had felt half-arsed, it wouldn't have worked. But it worked for me incredibly well. I felt every inch of what she went through, every bit of confusion about the Gorn, every bit of that burgeoning relationship. Again, it feeds into what I was saying about how I hate that Kirk and Spock had a shortcut. Here we get 1 hour, maybe. I think the episode was maybe a bit less than that. And it fully establishes a relationship between this Gorn woman and Ortegas that I believed deeply in. I fully believed everything they went through. I believed how bonded they were. I was hurt, as I said, when the Gorn character was killed, and I felt for Ortegas when she was wrestling with the idea that her friend died and it was another friend that did it, and so on and so forth. And I like that. I also love that, like I said, I've been waiting for so long for them to actually sit and watch the episode Arena and realize that the Gorn are not monsters and they're not xenomorphs. And I've seen interviews with, I think it was Akiva Goldsman, but it's one of the showrunners where they said, oh, we like the Gorn visually, and we thought it would be cool to have a monster that's irredeemable and just a monster. And okay, if you want to do that, that's fair enough, but don't then choose a character who the entire episode that they're in, Arena, explicitly, the point of it is, despite how they look and our natural revulsion to reptiles, they're not monsters. They're just like us. The Gorn captain and Captain Kirk are like minds. That's the whole point of the episode. So I was really waiting for them to finally show us a Gorn that was not just an irredeemable monster. Now, I think because they had to do that, they've unfortunately invented these Vesda that fulfill the same role. And I don't think Star Trek needs that, by the way. It doesn't need, we can't redeem this, it's just evil incarnate. It's just monstrous. And so I loved that, like I said, this Gorn got a bit of a redemption. And we saw that there is more to them. And they're not just monstrous creatures that want to consume and lay eggs in you and whatever else. And yeah, I love that. I also love that this was a test by the Metrons from Arena. Again, this episode reeks to me that somebody at some point between season 2 and 3 actually sat and watched that bloody episode, because it made perfect sense. It tied in brilliantly to that episode, enhancing it rather than making it worse by saying, this is an interesting experiment and we think there's lots to learn here, but we might at some point, see how humans and Gorn interact, but at the moment we just think it's too soon. And again, by building that up, it gives a little bit of background to Arena and makes it a little better, because now we have a reason for why the Metrons want to do that. And we have a bit of a framework to build that on, which was an episode that was good, that I liked. But also it corrects, like I said, a canon thing, which is them saying, it's just a very throwaway line in a way, but saying, we may also have to alter your perception of the Gorn, which means that now annoying fan canon, diehards like me can think, oh, so because nobody knows in Arena who the Gorn are, we could potentially just say the Metrons will mind wipe us all by the end of Strange New Worlds, and so we won't know it. Or we could use that to explain why we suddenly stop thinking of them as just monstrous creatures and start thinking of them as life forms in their own right, because the Metrons have done that. It's repairing an error that was unforced and that these writers made, but it's doing so in a way that, to me at least, fits. So yeah. So anyway, overall, putting all of those scores together, I worked out an average for season 3. So my average score for season 3 was 6.1 out of 10. Now that's still, if you're looking at it, binary wise, that's still a hit. That's still over 5. So it's still not bad. And I think a lot of that is because some of the episodes I really liked in the season saved it, if I'm perfectly honest. But you may be asking, well, how have you then come to the conclusion that the show has jumped the shark? How do you justify that? Surely that proves that it has not. And that's twofold. First of all, I've also, like I said, ranked every episode of season 1 and 2. I'm not going to go through them all, but I will tell you that both season 1 and 2, after I did my rankings, came out with an overall average score of 6.9 out of 10. There were some episodes I didn't like that knocked it down, and some that I did really like. But in any case, the fact is, season 1 and 2 consistency, they both got 6.9, and season 3 was a drop-off to 6.1. It's not a horrendous drop-off, but again, I'm quite forgiving. I'm a Star Trek fan, and if it's dropping off, that's not a great sign. But, that's its own thing, and you may say, it's not that bad, blah, blah, blah. I understand where you're coming from. But then, what really kind of cemented the situation for me was somebody on Blue Sky, TrekFan4387, Bill. Thank you, Bill, by the way, for letting me just copy your idea and run with this, because it really cemented a lot of things for this video and in my mind with regards to season 3 of Strange New Worlds. Now, what Bill did was he said, here's my way too early draft of Strange New Worlds' overall top 10. And he posted his top 10, which I won't share because it's his business. If you want to see it, I'm sure he would let you look on his Blue Sky page. But I did the same thing. I gave my top 10. So I'm going to share them with you. So my top 10 in descending order from 10 to number 1 are Wedding Bell Blues, The Elysian Kingdom, Strange New Worlds, The Serene Squall, The Sailor Who Ate Its Tail, A Quality of Mercy, Those Old Scientists, Subspace Rhapsody, Ad Astra Per Aspera, and then Terrarium at number 1. Now, the thing that is notable here is that there are, 1, 2, 3 episodes in my top 10 from season 3. Then you've got to also remember there are only 30 episodes of the show that exist. So, keep that in mind. But then the important part, I didn't get prompted to do this. Bill didn't do this, but I thought what would be interesting is to look at the flip side. And for me to list my top 10 worst episodes of Strange New Worlds, my bottom 10, if you will. And again, I'll go through them, and I'll go through them in descending order from 10 to number 1. And they are Ghosts of Illyria, Hegemony Part 2, A Space Adventure Hour, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, Under the Cloak of War, What is Starfleet, 4.5 Vulcans, Through the Lens of Time, All Those Who Wander, and New Life and New Civilizations, obviously. Surprising nobody, the worst for me. And I posted my thoughts on this in an immediate follow-up, Skeet, which I'll repeat to you here. It is to me shocking that in 30 episodes, that first of all, I can find 10 that are bad. Don't particularly have that much of an issue with Ghosts of Valyria. It just was an episode that didn't hit as strong as the others. And so, yeah, I could say, in fairness, okay, I found 9 out of 30 that were bad. That's still not a good record. That's unforgivable in a way, that you're writing 9 out of 30 of your, almost a third of the episodes that you've made are not working for me. That's not good enough, frankly. It's just, it's not. And again, you don't have to agree with my lists. I know there are some on my dislike list that people love, and there are probably some on my love list that you don't like. But those are just my thoughts. And again, then I looked at these 10 and thought, there's something interesting in the breakdown here. Now, there were 3 season 3 episodes in my top 10. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are 6 episodes in my 10 worst, all from season 3. And notably, 4 of the top 5, or the bottom 5, shall we say, are from season 3. I think that says a lot. And that is why, ultimately, I think I have to say, I do think Strange New Worlds has jumped the shark. I do agree with the people who are agreeing with what I said early in the season-ish, that season 3 is not as good as season 1 and 2. It simply isn't. Is it the absolute worst irredeemable thing ever? No. Now, I buy all of Star Trek on physical media when it comes out, and I will be buying season 3. But if it's a question of, why am I buying it? Is it atrocious? I don't like to buy things if I hate them. I still haven't bought, for example, Star Trek Section 31, because there's not really much there that I liked, and I don't. The completist in me wants to do it, and I probably will eventually if it's cheap enough, just to say I have it and I have all of Star Trek and it's there. But yeah, as I was thinking on, like, what would I be looking forward to if I buy Strange New Worlds season 3 and sit down and, like I always do when it's new, give it a rewatch? And I was like, there's not nothing. I really am looking forward to rewatching, The Sailor Who Ate Its Tail, Terrarium. Those are the 2 kind of big standouts for me. What else? There was another one. Oh, Wedding Bell Blues, again, for the fun aspect of it and the fan stuff. And, like I said, there are episodes in there that I'm sure I could stomach to watch again and might even enjoy, that I didn't hate. But again, there are episodes that I don't want to rewatch, that I'm not looking forward to, primarily through the lens of time and new life and new civilizations. And I don't like where we've ended up, and I don't like that to try and give some kind of conclusion and some wrap-up thoughts, I don't like that we can't course correct here, because it feels like what they're doing and what they're aiming us towards is not particularly good. It's going to hurt the legacy of this show overall. It is already kind of hurting Star Trek that exists instead of building on it for the most part. There's more stuff that hurts it than stuff that makes it better for me, which isn't to say the other doesn't exist, but it's just, and that episode, that New Life at New Civilizations episode, just really rubbed me the wrong way, because these are big things now. This is the explanation for where Marie Patel went and why Pike doesn't end up with her, and these other big questions, big stuff to do with ongoing characters that are throughout the show that is now sullied. And, also, like I said, Kirk and Spock, we now can't avoid the fact that they mind melded, and that gave them an instant, shortcut to closeness. I don't want that to be the case. I want them to bond naturally. So, yeah, I mean, like I said, those are my biggest issues with the episodes that I've talked about. And like I said, that's why I come to my conclusion that it has, unfortunately, jumped the shark. Because I don't think it can correct anything. I could be wrong. I mean, I will still watch the show. Star Trek and things like Doctor Who, for example, those are the main 2. Are shows that I can never stop watching, because I will always watch them. I'll always try and find something in them that I like. And because they are franchises and shows that I love, that are close to my heart, I'm always going to turn up for them. But I have to admit that my hopes for, like I said, the rest of Strange New Worlds are not great. I want to hope that it'll get better. I want to believe that it will. And I think, like I said, at least there are episodes in season 3 that I do love, so I can potentially cling on to the no pun intended, cling on to the idea that there might be some great stuff in the next 16 episodes that I will like, even if it's only a few, and there are equally as many, if not more, that I don't like. I don't want that to be the case, but we'll see. Also, it could completely turn around. It could end up that, season 4 winds up being a return to form, and then it turns out season 3 won't have jumped the shark because, it won't all be terrible after that. It'll just be that season 3 was a blip, and we mention it when people say, oh, what was the worst season of the show, as a sort of point of fact. But again, I can't now say it hasn't jumped the shark because I don't have evidence that it's going to get better, and I don't believe in my heart of hearts that it will. And because all the evidence we currently have is these 3 seasons, and the third and newest one is, to me, the worst. So that's why I say that, with the caveat that, yes, that can be undone. It sounds silly, but for me, you can unjump the shark. You can have a bad season and still recover from it. Several shows that I like have done so. Several haven't, but that's a different matter. So, yeah, so to kind of wrap things up, I really hope Strange New Worlds has found its way, because like I said, I can't even say find its way because it's all basically written, but I hope we get more stuff like Terrarium, like the Sailor Who Ate Its Tail, that builds on these relationships and gives me a real thrill and a fan joy from watching it, instead of things like New Life and New Civilizations, which just hurt Star Trek, hurt me as a fan, give me nothing at all to latch onto. It's an episode that I will rewatch. I rewatch everything, but when I do not think there's anything in there I'm looking forward to, that I want to see. There's not even like a small character moment or anything that I can remember off the top of my head that I'm like, that scene was good, and yeah, so I don't want to go on any longer. This has been long enough. It's been an hour. So hopefully, if you agree, you might see something here that you can respond to, and feel free to let me know. If you disagree, at least hopefully you feel like I've justified myself a little bit. And you can at least maybe understand, again, even if you acknowledge that you don't care about these issues the way that I do, if you don't, if you disagree that they exist, or you think I'm seeing them in a different way, again, this is all totally fair and fine. But again, I think it's notable that a lot of people seem to be sharing my view that this has been a weak season. And again, Star Trek is starting to fade away for me. It's going away. There's less of it now. Strange New Worlds is cancelled after its season and a half that we've got left, effectively. The Starfleet Academy hasn't started yet, but that's going to basically be, it looks like, at some point, the only show on the air when Strange New Worlds finishes. It doesn't look like we're starting any new ones or anything. Obviously, I'm not counting things like Star Trek Scouts, which is a kind of fun... It's great doing what it does, but it's for preschoolers, and nobody else particularly is meant to watch it, or will get that much great enjoyment out of it. It's a 4-minute thing, whatever. That's carrying on. And things like Star Trek HoM, which I'm loving so far, only 1 episode in, but I love that. But again, it's not a TV series, it's a podcast. It should have been a series, if you ask me, certainly on the evidence of the first episode, but it's a different medium. And so, yeah, like I said, it looks like Starfleet Academy will be the only series. And so I would like for these last 16 episodes of Strange New Worlds and these last potential bits towards another Star Trek hiatus to be good. And I don't think they've been good enough, with, like I said, the added proviso that there are some great episodes this season, and I'm not saying the whole thing is a write-off and to chuck it in the bin, but yes, to me, season 3 has been the weakest. Yes, as of now, Strange New Worlds has jumped the shark. Again, as I said, feel free to write in the comments, find me on social media, etc. And if you want to debate, kindly, don't argue, don't, shout abuse at me or whatever, but feel free to disagree with me. I'm always here to hear other things. And to be honest, I really like sometimes hearing what other people got out of an episode on a pleasant level that I didn't see, and that then I can use when I rewatch the episode to, I wonder if I can see that thing that they saw. So if you have something like that, please let me know. It would be great. It would enhance my experience, and I'm not going to disagree or argue with you necessarily, even though I might not agree with what you're saying, but I will give it a fair shake. And yeah, again, just in general, always look for us on social medias. We need lots more views and lots more interaction on this channel for our Hit or Miss Star Trek and Hit or Miss Doctor Who's. We're on a break at the moment. We will be back with a new Hit or Miss Star Trek next month. Next month when this goes out, which, as I said, will finish off our Cardassian season. I haven't said it outright, but I think you can probably guess it's going to be Chain of Command, an episode we couldn't not do. So we will be reviewing that at some point. We're recording that shortly, and it'll go out next month. And then we are going to be back next year. if the views don't improve, it may be our last season, but I already have next year planned, the episodes that I'm covering planned, the overall theme, a few guests booked. So we'll be back for Trek and Doctor Who next year. And yeah, please, by all means, I love nerding out. I love geeking out about this stuff. And if you want to do that, please come find me. Let's talk Star Trek. Ask me anything. I'm very open to hearing opinions, to being asked questions, to discussing all things, especially when it comes to Star Trek, because at the end of the day, I do love this franchise, and that's why I want it to be great, and I want to love it. So yeah, again, if you've enjoyed this video, please like, share, subscribe. If you want to share it with people to, to ignite this debate without it getting, like I said, into a flame war or anger or abuse, just to kind of share my points of view with people and see if they can agree or disagree, then it would be nice to get a conversation going. So feel free to do that as well. And yeah, in the meantime, like I said, I'm going to be back with other people next month, and probably not visually here in front of you, to review Chain of Command. And in the meantime, as always, remember, we are Starfleet. Live long and prosper.
Live long and prosper.
You have been listening to the Hit or Miss Star Trek podcast, part of the Hit or Miss Who Trek channel. Scripted, produced, and edited by Mike Wilson, based on an idea by Mike Wilson and Will Templar. Follow us on YouTube, your podcatcher of choice, and our social media. Links to all of these can be found by clicking on the link tree in the episode descriptions. This podcast is a Media Matters original production. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this podcast throughout subspace. We'll be back for another thrilling trek through the stars soon, but for now, hailing frequencies closed.
To warp out of here at once, maximum speed.